oh, with the record. I think I'm on now. Off you go.
Okay. So I'm a native of Colorado Springs. I graduated from high school in 1977. I went on to Kansas City, Missouri. I went to Rockhurst University. I got my Bachelor of Arts degree. I double majored in philosophy and communication, which entitles me to wonder out loud. While doing the philosophy, I found that I like to write. And so in philosophy, you take an idea and then tend to expound on it. And with the book, it's 180 photos. So everything that you want to say about the photo, then you condense it down to 2 sentences. You have to be very concise. So with that, after having played a number of other type of ball games like slow pitch softball, rec league or co-rec league, I found vintage baseball in 1994 at a Ken Burns talk about his video that came on the history of baseball in general. And there were a group of gentlemen that were throwing the ball around, and they had blue and gray Denver Blue Stockings uniforms on. They were so funny and engaging. I was like, well, how do I get involved? I went to 4 Mile House Historic Park, and the very first time I got up to bat, I was wearing a modified 1902 Colorado Springs Millionaires uniform. And the gentleman that was hurling, that was pitching, looked at me while I was at bat, or at the strike as we call it, and said, "Sir, are you standing in a hole?" And I said, "No, but I'll be standing on second in a moment." So that's how I got started in this and have been with them ever since. Well, let's get into the history of baseball here in Colorado Springs. And we actually have teams that were in the before 1900. So in the late 1800s, our very first team on the next slide is the 1874 IXL Club. And they were sponsored by the IXL Dairy, and they played the Valley Club of Pueblo. And there was no pictures of the two teams, but they talked about the teams and what they wore. So the IXL Club wore blue caps and pants and a white shirt, while the Valley Club of Pueblo wore a all-white flannel suit, and they had the letter V emblazoned on the left breast. And at the this game was played on July 4th, 1874 in Colorado Springs, and unfortunately Colorado Springs lost 53-44, a real pitcher's duel. Later on in Colorado Springs, we had the Denver and Rio Grande Reds, also known as the Colorado Springs Reds. They were there from 1881 to 1889. It was part of a loosely organized state league, and they played other teams such as the Longmont Utes, the Denver Brown Stockings, the Leadville Blues, and the Pueblo Soapweeds. And when you look at the picture on the right of the 1882 Denver and Rio Grande Reds, you'll see that the game has progressed with the equipment, as the catcher now has a catcher's mask. Following that, on the next slide is the picture of the old 168 engine and the coal car of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. This train was in Antlers Park. Unfortunately, it had undergone quite a bit of deterioration, especially due to people that were not taking care of it and using it for purposes they shouldn't have. It got into a group of disrepair. So they leased it to the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad, and now it has been fully restored and is back into usage. And this is a photo I took for the book. And the reason why I'm talking about this train is because in 1888, Albert Goodwill Spalding had a world tour. And before he did his world tour, he did a tour across the country. So the teams that he had played ball in Denver, and they played 2 games there. Then they took a train, probably very similar to 168, maybe not exactly 168, but rode it down here to Colorado Springs. They unfortunately, when they went to play their game, they only played 6 innings. They played poorly. They left after 6 innings and with all the gate receipts. Colorado Springs felt very cheated and actually telegraphed the next town in Utah where they were headed, telling people to watch out for those charlatans. Baseball has been a part of the area for a long time, and that includes the colleges. So on the next slide is talking about the intercollegiate baseball that was here. It started in the late 1890s at Colorado College, and Colorado College had a team for over 100 years. This 1898 photo of the Tigers features quilted knickers and socks that were alternately striped gold and black. Later on, following the turn of the century, the 1914 team featured a banded collar shirt with a black placket that had tigers on it. And they also had a team mascot, a pooch that's in the center of the team photo, sporting the Tigers CC cap. On the next slide, the Colorado College also had a photo of the 1970s team, and they had all kinds of caps that they wore for their practices. And so even then in the 70s, why CC had a cap that was vintage style with the 3 gold stripes and CC on the front, much similar to the Pittsburgh Pirates in the 70s. And when you look at the picture of Goose Gossage, and when he was with the Pirates, those were the uniforms they wore. And then also the United States Air Force Academy still continues to play. This is a photo from 2007, and it shows the dedication of a shortstop diving for the ball. Now, we are fortunate that also by this time, UCCS has a Division II team and plays throughout the state. They've played CSU Pueblo, UNC in Greeley, and the School of Mines in Golden. Well, let's get into our first professional team here in Colorado Springs. And on the next slide, you'll see the 1901 Colorado Springs Millionaires. And the reason why they were called the Millionaires is because in the paper at the time, they said that if everybody in Colorado Springs is a millionaire, why shouldn't our ball players be? And so here's a photo of the 1901 team in very plain but clean type uniforms. The Old English CS hadn't come into play yet, so these are block letters in navy blue with a blue cap, and the knickers with the just solid color socks. And in 1901, they didn't have a ballpark to play at, so they shared Washburn Field with the Colorado College Tigers. As we go on, one of the people that was very helpful to Colorado Springs was Winfield Scott Stratton. The team had been sold from their shortstop, Bill Hewlin, to Tom and Jimmy Burns, who owned the Burns Theater and also had been in mining and banking. Well, they asked Winfield Scott Stratton, who built the post office, the mining exchange building, if they would build the Millionaires a place to play. And he said yes. He built it along the trolley line that he owned, knowing that then people could take the trolley to the ball games. So Boulevard Park opened on April 23rd, 1902, and the picture on the right is a picture of Boulevard Park opening day, with it being able to seat anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 people. It was a state-of-the-art ballpark and was quite the shining gem in the area for to play ball. It was located in the Ivywild part of Colorado Springs. As we go on to the next slide, you have Mr. Stratton, Ed Giddings, and Ira Harris all going out on the field on opening day. And opening day, the Colorado Springs Millionaires played the Kansas City Blues. And so Mr. Stratton was given the privilege of being able to throw out the first ball. Ed Giddings was at bat, and Ira Harris was the umpire. They had told Ed not to swing at the pitch, but when Stratton threw it in, why, Giddings swung anyway, fouled the ball off. It went into the stands, at which Prudence Zorbris stood up. She was one of the local debutantes in town, and caught the ball, at which then the Midland Railway Band struck up the Stars and Stripes Forever. On the right-hand side is one of the open-air trolleys. So in the summer, these larger trolleys that were open-air and not enclosed were the kind of trolleys that people would generally take to the ballpark. On the next slide, the 1917 trolley line layout map shows that where the ballpark was and how it would go to the ballpark, and then if it didn't go on to the zoo, it would go to a Y, turn around, and then go back. On the right-hand side is one of our more famous ball players for the Millionaires, and that was Bert Jones. Bert was born in Golden, got his minor league playing here in Colorado, but was pitched for the 1900 St. Louis Cardinals. Then after that, he returned back to Colorado, played in Denver for a while, but for both the 1902 and 1903 season, he pitched for the Colorado Springs Millionaires. He and his wife, Bertina, were quite the couple. They set up a city league here. Then eventually Bert goes back to Golden, where he's mayor of Golden and later becomes a sheriff in Jefferson County. Well, the next slide is the 1904 Colorado Springs Millionaires, and that would be the last season that the Millionaires would play a full season. They played a partial season in 1905, but the 1904 season was the full season for the Millionaires. By this time, the uniform had changed, and instead of being a navy blue block CS, it had changed to a maroon Old English CS. They had a maroon collar, and then the cap was beige with a maroon visor and the two maroon stripes and the maroon socks. So they were quite a dashing look for the gentleman there. And on the right-hand photo is a couple of the leagues that were in the Midwest and West at that time. So on the top is the owners of the teams. Number 3, which is a picture of Tom Burns. And then in the lower part is the Illinois-Indiana League. but these were some of the gentlemen who basically kept the levels of community baseball going. So these are predecessors to what we know now as minor league. Locally in the City League on the next slide is a picture of the 1914 Colorado City All-Stars. Now this is what we know now as Old Colorado City, but there was a ball team in 1914 that played as Colorado City. And so again, the uniforms are continuing to change and be more efficient as far as uniforms to play in. We're getting away from the pillbox style of cap, and they've got much more equipment with gloves and catcher's masks and more protection because the ball is being wound tighter at this point. On the next slide in that City League is a 1920 Robins team that was sponsored by a local business by that name. And also in that City League, from 1945 to 1950, we had a all African American team that was known as the Brown Bombers. Originally, the team had called themselves the Clouds of Joy, but figured that they might be taken a little bit more seriously if they called themselves the Brown Bombers after the boxer Joe Louis. The Brown Bombers played in the City League and were City League champions in both 1949 and 1950. They were sponsored by Fannie Mae Duncan and the Cotton Club. So they wouldn't have had uniforms and equipment if it hadn't been for her. They played all over the state. They were well received here in Colorado Springs, but unfortunately, when they went outside the city, they weren't always so well received. But we are glad that they were able to play here in Colorado Springs and provide a unique aspect of baseball that maybe a lot of teams didn't have. They didn't always have the plethora of equipment that other teams might have. So when it came to bats, if something got broken, they would be taped up, nailed together, whatever they needed to do. But again, they were quite the ball team. And fortunately, we still have a few of those gentlemen alive today that played on those Brown Bomber teams. Now for the next slide, we'll talk about youth baseball. And in 1901, this is a photo of the Colorado Springs High School baseball team, now known as Palmer High School. And then on the right-hand side in 1911, this is the Manitou Springs High School team. But that year they didn't have shirts that said Manitou Springs on them. So the Cave of the Winds got in the act and was able to provide them uniforms that said Cave of the Winds Manitou on them. And that if you'll notice that there are also two young people of color that are in the ball team itself. And so this team in 1911 was integrated. Now we get to the next slide here.
Roger, I think I might be out of sync.
You could be, yes. Okay, there you go. No, go back. And one more, forward.
Oh, forward.
Oh.
Sky Sox?
No, this would be, yeah, Sky Sox.
Okay.
58 Sky Sox, yeah. So here we are with the Sky Sox version, first version, and they were part of the Western League. They were a Class A farm team of the Chicago White Sox. They played at Memorial Field, and they were specifically, that was specifically made for them there. The other teams in that league were also the Denver Bears and the Pueblo Dodgers, later to be the Pueblo Bruins, but because they switched affiliations and were associated with the Cubs the last couple of years that they were in the league. But here we see one of the Sky Sox sliding into third safely. And then also one of the best players that ever played on the Sky Sox was Sam Hairston. And he played there from 1952 to 56. And he's greeting a young fan there. Sam and his family were such favorites here in Colorado Springs that when he was called up to the majors, we sent him off and had purchased a brand new car for the family to travel in. So now on the next slide, we say, Aloha, Colorado Springs. Why do we say that? Because aloha means both hello and goodbye. In the 60s, there was the Hawaii Islanders, and Hawaii had quite a history of ball playing on the island. They had some really good teams. In 1970, they had a team that went 98-48, which in any league is fantastic. Their manager that year was Tom Troublehorn. And so then on the right there is a picture of the 1986 Hawaii Islanders. And this is getting ready before they would move to the mainland. It became increasingly more difficult on a travel schedule for them to find the finances for the ball team. So in 1987, leading to 88, the Elmore Group decided that they wanted to move the team to the mainland. They had a choice of either Sacramento or Colorado Springs. And fortunately, the Colorado Springs effort was successful in bringing the team to here. And there was quite a bit of trying to see what they would name the team. And Ralph Roughton, who was the sports editor at the Gazette at the time, was a proponent of them picking up the name and calling themselves the Sky Sox to honor the tradition of baseball that we had here. We didn't have baseball here from 1950, after the 1958 season when the Western League closed, to 1988. So we had a 30-year absence of ball. And so they decided to pick up on that and to call themselves the Colorado Springs Sky Sox. And they began their first season in 1988 at then Sky Sox Stadium. Now it's Rocky Mountain Vibe Stadium, UC Health Park. And just a little bit about the Sky Sox on the team on the next slide. The Sky Sox, of course, benefited. The hitters enjoyed hitting up here at this altitude at 6,000 feet. So homers were quite prevalent. They eventually did invest in their very own humidor, just like they have at the Rockies. So that cut down on that a little bit. But baseball is always one of those games that, you know, you don't always see eye to eye, especially with the umpire. So there's a regular argument between the manager and one of the umpires at the Sky Sox games. And then on the next slide, we have our very own Hall of Famer Rich Goose Gossage. And so he had a storied career. He went to Wasson High School, and he was chosen by the Chicago White Sox. He spent his first year with the Fox Cities baseball team. It was single A in Appleton, Wisconsin. He would only spend one season in Class A ball. He was then brought up to the White Sox, had a 20-year career with several different teams, most notably with the New York Yankees. In that picture on the left, he's with the Yankees in 1978, and the story he told me was that he was getting ready to pitch the ball, and his third baseman, Greg Nettles, was saying out loud, "Hit a pop fly, hit a pop fly," hoping that the Dodger batter would hit a pop fly. And sure enough, the Dodger batter hit a pop fly. Then Greg said, "Not to me, not to me." Goose leaps up in the air, points the pop fly out. The catcher for the Yankees secures the ball, and the Yankees beat the Dodgers for the World Series that year. Then in 2008, a long time coming, but Goose receives his plaque in his honor there in Cooperstown at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, I don't have a slide for this one, but we have enjoyed the Rocky Mountain vibes for one season. And now with the pandemic, they had a season set up to have lots of fun and promotions out there. But unfortunately, they, like a lot of other minor league teams, did not have a season at all. So hopefully next year, we'll have Rookie League ball back in the area and be able to go out to watch the vibes and enjoy some professional ball there. Hopefully Colorado Springs will continue to have baseball in some form. We would love to see it probably go back to AAA if we could, but that's all in the hands of both Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball. That'll keep you up to present right now. And so here's a couple of ways to get a hold of what I do. I have a book, as Michael mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that's the History of Baseball in Colorado Springs. It goes from 1874 to 2012. The book came out in 2013, and it's 180 photos. And then also you can get it on my Etsy website, where I also have desk decors that I make. They are any theme, any team, any player. And as you've seen to the left of me, it's this particular decor is a tribute to the Bambino, Babe Ruth, who did visit Colorado Springs again in 1940 around July 4th. But unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of coverage by our newspaper at that time. There was some. So if you go to and Google Danny Summers, he did an article on when Babe Ruth came to Colorado Springs and put on a hitting exhibition. And then also Ruth went on down to Pueblo, and there was a little more coverage there. But anyway, that kind of wraps it up with baseball in the Rocky Mountain region. There's lots more photos in the book, and there's lots more fun to be had at the ball field. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Roger. The book again is Baseball in Colorado Springs. It's available at the Manitou Springs Heritage website. at Manitou-Springs-Heritage-Center.org. And Roger, we really enjoyed this morning's talk. I'm glad to see that you covered the Hawaii Islanders, which incidentally a lot of people don't realize they're one of the top recognized minor league teams in the history of minor league baseball. They had an outstanding season in 1970 with 96 wins. Their manager at the time was Mr. Chuck Tanner, whose name many of you are familiar with. He served as a major league manager for several years. But again, Roger, we thank you for joining us this morning, and we thank everybody for joining in later on.